Chapter 105. AI Lizzie is here. The moment they realized this fact, the two people in the room had different feelings. Luoya felt a little numb. AI Lizzie's intrusion, while he was trying to prove his innocence to Nuwa was definitely not a good thing. In fact, Nuwa on the other side was also on high alert. Big brother? I'm here, AI Lizzie. The black-haired boy replied with difficulty. The door opened and a girl in a white dress walked into the room. She first smiled gently at Luoya, then turned to Nuwa and bowed politely. Good afternoon, Your Highness. It's been a long time since we last met after your birthday party. Good afternoon, AI Lizzie. Indeed, I went to look for you before, but I heard that you were still sleeping. I didn't expect you to come so quickly. Nuwa smiled in response to AI Lizzie's greeting. His words expressed his dissatisfaction at being disturbed from his conversation with Luoya. The silver-haired girl didn't react at all and replied calmly, I'm sorry. This matter is indeed my fault. Last night was my first time with Big Brother. I stayed up too late and was too tired. I couldn't get up this morning. AI Lizzie's explanation made Nuwa eyebrows jump while Luoya was dumbfounded. It can't be. Did they really do that kind of thing? Wait, don't panic. Ask first. AI Lizzie, what do you mean by first time? Of course it's the first time I slept on the same bed as Big Brother. Oh, is that so? Luoya patted her chest and gasped for breath as she wiped her forehead. She was finally relieved. But while Luoya had avoided the crisis, Nuwa was not happy at all. After all, the person she liked had an adopted sister who was not related to her by blood. If she could still be happy, she would be crowned king. Nuwa main point was not whether Luoya had made a mistake this time. Her main point was that he had the motive and opportunity to make a mistake at all times. As the saying goes, there is only the difference between the 0th time and the umpteenth time. This time, the two of them were able to sleep on the same bed. Next time, they would be able to roll around in the same bed. Miss AI Lizzie, as a lady, I don't think your actions are appropriate. The golden-haired angel maintained a friendly smile on her face. Her words carried a hint of criticism. The Akot family is a big family with a long history, so they shouldn't have the absurd custom of letting men and women of the same age share the same bed, right? This kind of thing only happens in commoner families with many brothers and sisters, right? I think there are quite a lot of rooms in the labyrinth. By the way, Luoya, which room were we hugging in before? It has changed so much in the past 200 years that I can't recognize it. Hugging together? Elder brother? No, that was... The hidden message in Nuwa words caused AI Lizzie's expression to change slightly. Luoya hurriedly explained. After listening to Luoya's wonderful adventure, AI Lizzie heaved a sigh of relief. But Nuwa questioning did not stop because of this. Luoya, tell me which room it was. Miss Angel continued to ask with a smile. Luoya had no choice but to seriously recall. But this recollection made his face pale. Wait, that room can't be. Fuck. Yes, it's the third room in the west. Is that so? The third room in the west. You said it so abstractly, I still need to think about it. Aya, isn't that Miss AI Lizzie's room? Nuwa suddenly realized. She looked at the silver-haired girl with an apologetic expression. So AI Lizzie lived in the room we used before. But the bed should have been changed, right? This is really... Hee, just pretend I didn't say anything. Miss Angel looked at the angry AI Lizzie with a pitiful expression. She pitied her and was too lazy to pursue the matter. This ultimate blow not only killed AI Lizzie, it also killed Luoya. What's going on? This feeling of tasting it right in front of him. The black-haired boy swallowed a mouthful of saliva and did not dare to make a sound. He tried his best to reduce his presence. On the other side, the silver-haired girl also calmed her breathing and smiled again. Is that so? Your Highness seems to have used that place before. It's your memory, right? Since that's the case, I'll give in. Elder brother and I will be in another room next time. All right, I'll go find elder brother. Every day, they would rack their brains on how to destroy the organizations, countries, or individuals on it. Even if I fucking want to kill you, no one can stop me. This was Heathcliff's attitude towards villains who had offended the first level, and they had done just that. The Secret Ritual Church, a large organization of extraordinaires that had already been destroyed, had once been the #1 target on this list. After years of large-scale pursuit without regard for the cost, even such a large organization could not withstand it. From this, one could see how terrifying the Order of Annihilation was. It was terrifying because there was no end to it. Our protection relationship is based on an ancient contract. Originally, it should have been the second level, but since I myself made a similar promise, I made an exception and upgraded it to the first level. The first level? That means, that's right. From this point of view, you are now a member of the royal family. You are my closest family member, and I am your protector. Every action that harms you is the most direct provocation to me. Nuwa Ayer's words stunned Luo Ye. He never thought that his relationship with the princess would develop to such an extent that Nuwa Ayer was willing to protect him with the country's machinery. To be honest, this protector system gave Luo Ye a great sense of security. As the villain of the original work, Luo Ye's goal had always been to capture the flag and increase his chances of survival. But now, it seemed that Nuwa Ayer had achieved more than half of his goal. With the support of Nuwa Ayer and his precious AI Lizzie, even if the main character and the remaining 2 female leads wanted to kill him, Luo Ye would be invincible. Nuwa Ayer, thank you. After hesitating for a long time, Luo Ye could only express his gratitude. Nuwa Ayer heard his words and smiled, then turned to look at AI Lizzie, whose face was pale. Miss AI Lizzie, you should understand now. As Luo Ye's protector, I have to be concerned about his situation, so the Akhat family's matters cannot be used as an excuse to stop me. So that's how it is. Is this how you do it? Your Highness. The silver-haired girl clenched her fist and tried to control her emotions. She never thought that other than herself, there would be someone else who could see through the uneasiness that Luo Ye had been hiding so well. The girl raised her red eyes with a hint of weakness, but more than that, there was determination. Your Highness, I don't have your power and status, so I can't do what you said. But don't think that you can monopolize brother. You may be able to protect brother, but that doesn't mean that I can't do anything. Your Highness is so busy with official business. Although you are a protector, how many days do you have to accompany brother? Chapter 107. In the familiar study room, Luo Ye looked at a bookshelf full of diaries and skillfully pulled one out. These were hundreds of years-old antiques, and it was also the price of Ponte's ability. During the new year, Luo Ye thought about burning them, but now, he just felt a little nostalgic. In the journey of the historical fragment, although it wasn't long, Ponte left a deep impression on Luo Ye. Now that Luo Ye returned to reality, he sighed and no longer had the interest to destroy the corpse. What exactly are you going to tell me about the ancestors? Luo Ye flipped through the pages of psychological crimes records while absent-mindedly asking Nuwa Ayer. The blonde girl was sitting at the side, stroking the teacup that Wei Dualia used. After hearing Luo Ye's question, she turned her head with a troubled expression. As you know, I've broken through the bloodline and advanced to silver, so these days, I've been stabilizing my condition. But while adjusting my body's condition, I also looked through many records in my free time and found some hidden secrets. Oh, is that so? What is it? There are many, such as, I'm actually a descendant of Vader. I see. What did you say? Luo Ye, who was still calmly flipping through the book, answered subconsciously. But after the words left his mouth, he suddenly reacted. He jumped up and looked at the girl on the chair in surprise. His eyes were full of disbelief. Nuwa Ayer wasn't surprised by Luo Ye's reaction. She just smiled bitterly and nodded. You didn't hear wrong. I, or the current royal bloodline, strictly speaking, is inherited from Vader Hei's Crete. What happened? Wasn't he defeated in a battle with Ryan of the Holy See in history? He lost, but it doesn't mean he died. Nuwa Ayer sighed and told Luo Ye the confidential information kept by the royal family. More than 100 years ago, at the end of the Gemini War and the March Rebellion, although Vader was powerful, he didn't go all out because he couldn't find Wei Dualia. In other words, he didn't reach Source Rank 2, so St. Leon easily defeated him when he returned. After quickly quelling the rebellion in St. Lorraine, Vader was naturally put on trial. But unlike the rumors of a secret execution, Vader was in fact only imprisoned. There were three main reasons for this verdict. The first was naturally the attitude of the Holy See Leon at that time. Leon was a relatively weak monarch in the history of the Hei's Crete family. He was good at fighting for the interests of the kingdom, but he was a typical peacemaker. He was very tolerant of the nobles and internal affairs, and didn't know how to deal with his own people. This could be seen from how he was forced to send Princess Mary out of the palace to wait for an opportunity. However, such a good-for-nothing had actually become strong after a few setbacks. After losing his wife, he stood his ground on the matter of Vader and fell out with the nobles for the first time. In his opinion, it was because the nobles had forced Mary away that such a huge problem had occurred in his family. Therefore, he firmly refused to execute Vader. The second reason was because of Wei Dualia. At that time, Wei Dualia was the representative of the conservatives. Her sibling relationship made it impossible for her to kill her brother who had already been defeated. Furthermore, Wei Dualia had Pont behind him. This meant that the interest groups after the victory of the war remained silent on this matter. The third reason was because of the five major nobles. As everyone knew, the five major nobles were the foundation of the theocracy. Now, except for the Akate family and the Luxon family, who had been neutral for 10,000 years, the other three families had more or less participated in the rebellion. This didn't even include their vassals. It should be known that the nobles who could send troops all had territories. If this matter was investigated further, half of the nobles in the theocracy would be implicated. Therefore, the nobles who had contributed to Vader's sentence and punishment didn't want it to be too severe, because that would mean that they, as accomplices, had also committed a serious crime. Therefore, when they found out about the attitude of the royal family towards Vader, they immediately jumped out to whitewash him. With these three reasons, Vader's final outcome was life imprisonment. The news released to the public was that he had been secretly executed. I see. I understand why Vader didn't die. But why are you his descendant? What about Wei Dualia? According to the historical records, Wei Dualia's ancestor was married. But in reality, it was a fake marriage. Her husband, William, was played by her servant girl disguised as a man. Is that even possible? Nuo Ayer's words completely shocked Luoya. He never thought that the royal family would be so playful. Miss Angel expressed her understanding of Luoya's shock. In fact, when she first found out about the truth, her reaction was much greater than Luoya's. Wait a minute. The Queen of Wei Dualia's fake marriage. Could it be that? Yes. One reason was to legally adopt her younger brother Vader's son. The other reason was Mr. Ponte. After listening to Nuo Ayer's explanation, Luoya understood that the conservative ideology of that era was far more serious than he had imagined. A third party from the royal family who interfered in a noble's marriage would be viewed with hostility by all noble women. After all, in terms of qualifications, there was basically no woman who could compare to the queen of the angel family. In the face of such a situation, the married Ponte didn't want Wei Dualia to sacrifice so much for him. After careful consideration, he rejected her. But what he didn't expect was that Wei Dualia's feelings weren't just temporary, but long-term love. That's right. The Queen of Wei Dualia started a war of attrition. After she adopted Vader's son to shut the mouths of the ministers who were complaining about the lack of a successor, Wei Dualia began to wait for Ponte. This lasted for more than 20 years, and Ponte's wife died of exhaustion. Ponte's nominal wife wasn't an extraordinary. Strictly speaking, she was a victim of a traditional marriage. After giving birth, she separated from him and passed away due to illness in her 40s. At that time, Ponte was already in his 50s, and Wei Dualia was nearing his 40s. Although they looked very old, it was still considered the golden age for marriage for extraordinary. So they were together in the end? Wait a minute, but Wei Dualia only ruled for more than 40 years. In the end, she also passed away due to illness. That means they were together for 10 years? Chapter 108. The Land of Chaos, Tansun, Cullen Mountain Range. A man with dark brown hair kicked away a dead man hanging from his sword and swung his sword to get rid of the remaining blood on the blade. Steam rose from his body, and his entire body was red like a boiled crab. But only those who were familiar with him would know that this was the price he had to pay for using the curse. The man's name was Lodney. He was a level 3 source-rank supernatural being and was rather famous in the fringe. However, unlike his status as a high-ranking supernatural being, he did not have a prominent position or a huge fortune. He was a heretic. Heretics were not welcomed in most of the stable human kingdoms. The Austin Empire was an enemy of the theocracy and would accept a few heretics. Other than that, most of the heretics would live in war-torn lands or small kingdoms that lacked supernatural powers. The rest would move to the ungoverned lands at the edge of the human world to fend for themselves. Of course, as a high-ranking supernatural being, Lodney did not have to worry about social connections. When he was young, he did travel to various kingdoms with his passion. But after he was injured in an adventure and suffered from the aftereffects, Lodney stopped. He returned to his hometown and became the village chief of a heretic village in the Fringe. The Fringe was a very special place. The nobles of every kingdom knew that the Fringe often produced precious mutated life forms, or in other words, magical creature materials. But if they were to visit the Fringe in person, they would immediately be regarded as a lunatic. The reason Tantsun was called the Fringe was because it was a place where nobles could enter but never leave. Be it the nobles of other kingdoms or the kings of small kingdoms, they were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. This was because the strength of the residents here was far beyond what the outside world could imagine. Pagans, evil cultists, these people who couldn't live anywhere else had to hide in the mountains for various reasons. Tantsun was like a vacuum cleaner, constantly attracting these powerful people who had nowhere to go. This was a dangerous place where only the strong, or those who had the protection of the strong, could survive. Due to some unknown reasons, the land of Tantsun was filled with powerful magical creatures. Every few years, there would be a disastrous beast tide. It could be said that this place was completely unsuitable for human habitation. After a long period of survival of the fittest, nearly half of the people living in this place were supernatural beings. They were powerful, but they were not rich. Therefore, whenever an outsider entered Tantsun, unless they were a powerful dragon, they would be ruthlessly slaughtered by them. Usually, the residents of Tantsun would build their own villages according to their own sects, and there would be alliances and wars between them. Even though the cultists had many beliefs, it didn't mean that they were brainless. They were equally disgusted with the vicious cultists. Rodney was one of those people who hated the cultists. After killing a member of the evil cult, the brown-haired man was already panting heavily. The evil cult member that had just died under his blade was not just any small fry, but a level 4 source-grade expert. The difference between source rank 3 and source rank 4 was obvious. Originally, the difference should have been huge, but Rodney's injuries in his early years made it difficult for him to continue fighting. Furthermore, he wasn't facing a source rank 4. The man looked at the mountain forest that looked like a typhoon had passed through. There were already over 10 people lying there, and none of them had a complete corpse. Without a doubt, this was a fierce battle. But unlike the usual vendettas or fights over territory, the reason for this battle made Rodney very uneasy. These damned cultists were here to rob him. Snake God Scale. This was an ancient curse item preserved in Rodney's village. As for why it was ancient, it started from Rodney, who brought it back to his hometown. Yes, this Snake God Scale was brought back by Rodney from the outside many years ago. Rodney did not fight alone in the world back then, but he joined an adventurer group. The Shia world was too big. Currently, there was a large amount of undeveloped land outside of the known areas, but the scope of human activities had been constantly changing since ancient times. The so-called undeveloped land was actually very likely to have a civilization in the distant past. It could have belonged to ancient humans, or it could have belonged to an intelligent race in myths and legends. Not to mention the distant past, even the ancient Austin Empire, which was destroyed after the Tyrant Rebellion 1,000 years ago, had piles of human relics and good things. Many of them were even priceless now. Such a huge temptation naturally attracted countless people to embark on a journey of searching. Adventurer groups were spontaneous organizations that searched for treasures in ancient ruins. Some were big, some were small, and some were strong. There were all kinds of people in them, and it was common for them to have different countries and religions. As long as they had enough gold coins, everything could be accommodated. Adventurer groups were one of the few industries that the cultists could engage in stably. When Rodney was young, he was upright and powerful. He led his team and made a name for himself. But like many adventurer groups, even they could not escape bad luck. If you often walk by the river, how can your shoes not be wet? It was common for adventurer groups, who were accompanied by danger every day, and even took the initiative to step into dangerous places. Rodney, who was once young and impetuous, thought that his team was the exception, but the final result was cruel. All of his companions were dead. Rodney was the only one who managed to escape with serious injuries. Along with him, the scale of the serpent god was brought out of the ruins and reappeared in the world. According to the dead scholars, the ruins they entered were at least 2,000 years ago, before the establishment of the ancient Austin Empire in the Second Era. The scale of the serpent god was a collection enshrined in the ruins. It was estimated that it was at least 1,000 years old. After his team was wiped out, Rodney was disheartened. He was unwilling to sell his team's last loot to a merchant. So, he brought the inconspicuous treasure back to his hometown. But to his surprise, the black scale played a huge role in the fringe. Ever since the scale of the serpent god was brought back, the monsters in the fringe seemed to be afraid of something and were unwilling to approach Rodney's village. The number of snake monsters in the vicinity also increased significantly. But miraculously, the snakes did not attack the villagers. On the contrary, they seemed to be protecting the villagers. Such a miraculous situation naturally attracted the attention of the people, and Rodney was elected as the village chief. From then on, the village went smoothly for more than 10 years, and the originally small village began to develop into a medium-sized village. Rodney's village had made a fortune with the scale of the serpent god. In a few decades, Rodney's village would have become one of the largest settlements in the fringe. But he did not expect that, for some reason, Tanson's Marta Merchant Guild had set their sights on his village. Marta Merchant Guild was one of the few local merchant guilds in the vicinity of Tanson. On the surface, they appeared to be an ordinary merchant guild that supplied raw materials to various countries. But Rodney and a few others knew that they were actually a whitewashing organization organized by the cultists. Since half a month ago, during the new year, the Marta Chamber of Commerce had gotten wind of the scale of the serpent deity and came to negotiate with Rodney. At first, they wanted to buy it at a low price, but after being rejected by Rodney, they revealed their true nature and planned to kill and rob without any capital. However, while dreams were plentiful, reality was harsh. How could a village that could produce a genius like Rodney be an ordinary place? Rodney's village was made up of the descendants of the cultists who possessed the power element. According to legend, the power element was passed down from the ancient giants. They were powerful fighters, but they had to pay a heavy price. Historically, their ancestors had relied on their extraordinary abilities to roam the theocracy, but they were forced to flee due to a great calamity. Ever since then, they had taken root in the fringe, Tanson. Therefore, although Rodney's village did not have many supernatural individuals, they were all very good fighters. The cultists had kicked an iron plate and were killed on the spot. At first, Rodney didn't pay much attention to the incident. There were too many cultists in the fringe, and they were as plentiful as wheat. Their leader probably wouldn't even notice that they were missing. But what he didn't expect was that the cultists and Marta Merchant Guild weren't the cultists who had set their sights on them. It was a larger organization. Chapter 109. You saw the revival of the ancient gods last night? Oh, I see. At the edge of the forest, in the middle of a large group of sword-wielding cultists, Steamed Crab, Rodney weakly responded to Old Wood's words with a pitiful expression. The gray-haired and white-bearded Old Wood was the previous village chief of the village. He had been in charge of the village for many years when Rodney was young. Originally, he had retired after handing over the reins to Rodney, who had returned from a long journey with treasures. But this time, the village was in danger. There were many enemies, so Rodney had no choice but to ask the old village chief for help. Old Wood was a level 3 source ranker. Although he was old, He was more than capable of dealing with some level 4 source rankers. But as the saying goes, every family has its own difficulties. Oldwood did not collapse during the battle, but after the battle, the price he had to pay was easily reversed. Oldwood's price was very simple. It was stupidity. From the perspective of a Luoya modern person, it was a bit like Alzheimer's. Therefore, when Wood descended from the sky and began to tell Rodney about the resurrection of the gods, Rodney felt that this guy was crazy. However, Wood was the former village chief, and Rodney, who respected the old and loved the young, could not refute him. He could only say, "Yes, yes, yes, yes. Damn it, brat. I'm telling the truth. I've paid the price. I'm not crazy. Yes, the village chief is wise. Do you have anything else?" Curry. You tell him. Looking at Rodney, who was trying to play with him, Oldwood beat his chest and stomped his feet in anger. In the end, he had no choice but to pull over a young man with a dog. The blue-haired young man named Curry stroked the dog and began to testify for Oldwood's words. "A few?" "Yes, and we all described it afterwards. The scene we saw was basically the same." Curry stroked the dog's head and began to describe in detail. Those who had spirit vision were all extraordinaires who had obtained origin substances and were inclined towards magic. The scene they saw was slightly different, but it was generally the same. The image of a young man standing on the shoulder of a giant skeleton. Did you see it clearly?" Rodney finished steaming and asked for details with a confused and doubtful expression, but the answers he received did not satisfy him. The giant skeleton could be explained as the giant's appearance after death, but the young man standing on the giant's shoulder, no matter how one looked at it, didn't they have an equal relationship? But how could humans be on equal footing with giants? Giants were a race on the same level as angels in myths and legends. It could be said that their concept was not much different from that of gods. Would such an existence allow a human to step on their shoulders? But it really is a human youth. That height and build, but I can't see his face clearly. Curry, you don't understand. This is very normal. Most of the great existences can't be seen directly. From this point of view, that young man may be the messenger of God. The emissary of God is the Holy Son? Yes, the Holy Son. Wait a moment. Rodney stood up and stopped the two excited people. He began to pull the dog-headed guard captain and the intermittent Alzheimer patient back to reality. The pagans were different from the Shia believers. Although they were divided into different sects and had different origin substances, many of them did not believe in the gods of their sections. One of the reasons was that their identity as a pagan did not bring them any benefits. Another reason was that most of the gods of their sects had already died, leaving only the origin substances for humans to use. The pagans in Rodney's village all belonged to the faction of the origin substance, power. Most of them had respect for the ancient gods, but that was when the ancient gods died or were in a deep sleep. When the source of the power, origin substance awakened again, they would definitely be affected. On the bright side, the awakening of the ancient gods would strengthen the entire origin substance. All the pagans who used the power, origin substance would gradually become stronger in the future. It was like the appearance of a leader activating the entire team. The closer they were to the source, the stronger they would be, and the smoother their development would be. But from a bad point of view, the ancient gods were terrifying existences on the path of ascension. They were likely to influence individuals downstream through the connection of the Sapphira. The most typical example was the conversion of some pagans into cultists. Many pagans did not become cultists of their own volition, but the corruption of the ancient gods upstream of the Sapphira had affected them. This subjective uncontrollability could be said to be an important reason why the mainstream human community refused to use the origin substances other than the three major origin substances. Now, Rodney and the others had to face such a risk. From the situation of spirit vision, it seems that he has no intention of controlling us. Of course, it could also be that our gazes are not threatening at all and did not attract his attention at all. Wood stroked his beard and said while stroking his beard. Just like how humans would not notice the eyes of ants when they were walking, it was normal for great beings to ignore small human beings. However, from this point of view, Ignoring them seemed to be equivalent to not knowing how to manipulate them. It seemed to be a good thing. If we can find that young man, the son of God, we might be able to ask for the protection of the gods through him. But the location? The old man frowned and sighed. So far, they had too little information, and there was nothing they could do. Rodney listened for a while, reorganized his emotions, and began to talk about his findings. I know what you're talking about, but we don't have the time to discuss it in detail. The Marta conglomerate has their eyes on us. They want the scale of the serpent god. It seems that there's a force that wants to buy it at a high price. I just forced them to tell me this. There's a force behind the Marta conglomerate? He had a strong desire to hug her, but he restrained himself in the end. Well, you didn't pounce on me? Why should I pounce on you? Roja was speechless as he looked at Noelle's face that said, "You're not right." He suspected that she thought all the men in the world were idiots. This kind of narcissism, well, she seems to have the capital to be narcissistic. Luoya looked at the almost perfect beauty in front of him. He suddenly felt that his willpower was too strong. A normal person wouldn't be able to resist the temptation of a princess like Nua Iyer. After thinking for a long time, he thought that it might be because he watched too much AI Lizzie, which trained him to resist the perfect creature. So what if I pounced on you? Would you let me have my way? No, I thought that would give me a reason to step on you. Nua Iyer was honest with her intentions. Luoya couldn't help but widen his eyes. Can you not always set so many traps? Because you've always rejected me. Even if it's me, I still want you to accommodate me a little according to my preferences. The blonde girl seemed a little lonely as she sighed. Seeing this, Roja's eyebrows twitched. After a while, he asked, "What do you mean by stepping on me? Are you really willing to accompany me? It's actually very simple. You just have to lie on the ground like a dog." I refuse. Luoya rejected the angel of abuse halfway through. Nua Iyer was speechless and dissatisfied, but she didn't say anything. The two chatted for a while before leaving the room one after the other to have a tea party with AI Lizzie. But Luoya didn't expect it to be a hellish afternoon tea party. Luoya was sandwiched between Nua Iyer and AI Lizzie by the window. He stared blankly at the forks the two girls put in front of him. However, the records had been destroyed, so Luoya could not find too much detail. He was helpless about this, but being in the holy capital gave him other means. Even if the Akkad family didn't have any records of these two, it didn't mean that other places didn't have records of these two. The black-haired boy closed the book and looked at Anna, who was standing quietly at the side. "Prepare the car. We're going to the Royal Library." In an exquisite and elegant small space, the black-haired boy raised his teacup and took a sip of tea. He looked at the ancient book in his hand, and his heart was filled with emotion. The Royal Library of the Holy Capital was one of the most magnificent buildings in the holy capital of Lorraine. It had been built for 100 years, and although it was not as magnificent as the St. Pharaoh's Cathedral, it had the unique elegance of a scholar. Overall, it had a strong scholarly atmosphere, and a lot of effort had been put into the decoration. The reason why the Royal Library was called the Royal Library was naturally because the Heathcliff family had paid for it. It was obvious that the royal family had invested a lot in this library, but fortunately, the investment had paid off. The Royal Library of the Holy Capital was now one of the 3 great libraries in Xia. It had been famous for 100 years since it was built, and its name had spread throughout the world. The Holy Capital Royal Library of the Theocracy of St. Maester, the Millennium Glory Library of the Austin Empire, and the National Wisdom Library of the Kingdom of Scholars, Bulonia, were the 3 most famous libraries in the Xia world. These 3 libraries together held 60% of the ancient records of mankind, and could be said to be the symbol of the Xia civilization. The Royal Library of the Theocracy was the last of the 3 great libraries to be built. In fact, it was founded because of a dispute. The founder of the largest library in the Theocracy was Sanctus Lucas, who was the father of the current Sanctus John. According to the royal family secrets revealed by Nua Iyer, he should be the son of Vader and the adopted son of Wei Dualia. Sanctus Lucas was one of the most interesting Sanctus in history. Perhaps he inherited it from his Chinibu father, Vader, Or perhaps Wei Dualia spoiled him too much because he felt guilty. In any case, this Sanctus Lucas had an extremely high self-esteem, and he was the kind of person who could not bear the slightest grievance. Normally, it would be fine. The Heathcliff family was so powerful that no one in the theocracy dared to offend them. However, as the saying went, no one could escape the beating of society, not even someone as powerful as Sanctus Lucas. The Shia Eastern Border Defense Agreement was an important agreement that all the countries in Shia had to sign every 30 years. The purpose of this agreement was to determine the defensive area and military deployment of each country at the eastern border to guard against the aliens, and to jointly maintain the peace and development of the human world. As for why it was a 30-year agreement instead of a 100-year agreement, it was mainly because other than a few large countries, some small countries were dying too quickly. Often, the frontline soldiers of a country would not have enough food and pay, and they would simply die. Of course, there was a higher possibility that they would pretend to disband to escape the sanctions of the agreement, and then go back to reassemble and throw themselves into internal wars. This kind of operation basically happened once every decade or so, but the frequency of holding a world conference once every decade or so was too high. After all, transportation in Shia was not convenient. It would take the Sanctus a few months to travel to Austin and back. In addition, negotiations and wrangling would take even longer. Therefore, they simply chose a small country to double the average number of years it would take 30 years. The conference that Sanctus Lucas attended was held in the capital of the Austin Empire, Theo. The process of the conference was rather difficult. There was a lot of wrangling between several large countries. Among them, the Austin Empire and its old rival, the theocracy, had a conflict, and it was at that time that Lucas was beaten up. Since it was a negotiation between the heads of countries, they naturally could not be locked in a room like a company meeting. Most of their negotiations would only take place once every 10 days or half a month. As for the time outside of the negotiations, they would usually visit each other and build relationships, or visit places of interest or attend banquets under the arrangement of the host. For example, the large pile of diaries left behind by Ponte could be considered ancient texts, even now, but when Luoya had flipped through them, he hadn't felt it before. Why? Wasn't to read? Luoya shook his head to get rid of this thought that made him speechless. After thinking about it carefully, he felt that the crown origin substance could only be stimulated by reading something of research value. Or perhaps, from the name of the crown, it could only be useful if it was related to the king's history. Luoya couldn't figure this out in a short time, but he wasn't worried because the Akhat family had a lot of records. They were all reliable things that his ancestors had used. If he didn't know which one would be useful, he would just give it a try. After all, there were a lot of them, and they would definitely fill his stomach. Luoya, who had found a way to improve his supernatural power, was very happy. He didn't say anything and immediately began to level up. He carefully read the history of the human countries after they migrated to the West. The more he read, the more he felt that it was quite interesting. In his previous life, Luoya was a liberal arts student. Geography and history were his specialties. He also had a hobby in this area. However, unlike the history of his previous life, the history of the Shia world was somewhat mythical due to the supernatural power. In most people's minds, after the cataclysm at the end of the Second Era, humans migrated to this peaceful land through the westward migration. However, the truth was that this land was not peaceful from the beginning. The natural environment was too primitive, and there were many ferocious monsters that were recorded in the history books. The mutated animals in this world were very ferocious. Luoya knew this when he saw Kadia's deer head during the winter hunt. However, although the deer was ferocious, it was nothing compared to the monsters that the first human pioneers encountered when they opened up a new world. In the mythology of the Shia world, the creator god, Shia, was the mother of all intelligent races. These races did not include animals in the natural world. After all, they did not have self-consciousness. If they did, the entire Shia world would have to be vegetarian. However, although there were no animal races, there were still intelligent creatures in the form of animals. For example, the sacred beasts that obeyed Shia's orders had source substance. Source substance was basically a symbol of whether a creature was intelligent or not. Ordinary animals would not have source substance even if they were mutated. They were barbaric and brainless. They might have the cunning of wild animals, and they might know some basic tactics. However, no matter how strong they were, their thinking was still the same as that of wild animals. Of course, those who chose not to use their minds were indeed beasts, but their combat power was generally very high. No matter how dull or passionate they were, there was a common belief that shined in their hearts. That was, humans can conquer nature. Wait a minute, so the development of our Akate territory is very low? Reading up to this point, Luoya, who was secretly excited, suddenly remembered the report he read in his home. When the theocracy was first established, the Akate family's territory was very large. They were even the leader of the 5 noble families. However, according to the division of power, the Akate family had never been the leader of the 5 noble families. The main reason was that the Akate family's land was undeveloped. Why was Eric so strong 200 years ago? It was because most of their territories were plains, which were suitable for farming and had a large population. Although their territory was not as large as the Akate families, it was the least difficult to develop among the 5 noble families. As for the other noble families, the Bafas family in the North Sea was fishing, the Lucen family had a large forest area, and the Wester family had many mountains. Chapter 114. In the palace, the gray-haired maid suppressed her excitement and walked towards her master's palace. Today was a day of special significance. It was the day that Mia had been looking forward to, and it was also a day that was a little sad. Today, the palace would hold a grand ceremony for the Nuwa princess to fulfill the royal mission and become the protector of the Akate family's heir, Luoya Akate. As the princess' personal servant, Mia would also work extra hard today. Personal servant was a relatively special position. Generally speaking, it would be carefully selected, and the requirements were very strict. Especially in the big noble families and the royal family, the heir's personal servant would be strictly checked, and the status of the servant would not be too low. In fact, this was the case for Mia. Although she was the maid who served the Nuwa princess, she was also the daughter of a noble family, and her father's title was not low. In the years that she had been in this position, Mia had obtained substantial benefits for her family. Her father's official position was promoted, and the eldest brother in the family was also appreciated by the royal family. However, it had to be said that Mia was further and further away from her family. She came to the palace alone when she was in her teens, which was the most sensitive age. It would be a lie to say that she had not suffered any grievances, but she had no relatives by her side, so she could only hide everything in her heart. It was the same when she went home to chat during the holidays. Her family was more concerned about the royal family than her. Her father told her to work hard and win glory for the family, and her brother also asked if there was a better way. Sometimes, Mia felt that she was not so much a member of the family as a tool of the family. Her family's feelings for her and her feelings for her family had faded, but human beings yearned for love. Therefore, Mia placed her feelings on the princess who had accompanied her since she was a child. After several years of living together, Mia sometimes even had the illusion that she was Nuwa elder sister. Of course, she knew that it was just a delusion. Nuwa status was not something she could compare to, but even so, she could not help but want to take care of her. Hence, Mia made her move. A while ago, Mia had used her connections to spread a rumor. It was a story about 2 children who were in love with each other and ended up being imprisoned. It was an explosive story that perfectly poked at most people's sore spot. Although she didn't mention any names, Mia had released some misleading information. Everyone already knew who the 2 people in the story were. Miss Maid's purpose was very clear. She wanted to create an established fact and create an environment where everyone was on the same side as her. After all, it was already a miracle for a Nuwa to fall in love with someone. Although in the eyes of outsiders, the princess was noble and elegant, benevolent and dignified, Mia, who had been with her for the longest time, could see that she had never really valued any of her subjects. She treated everyone equally. To a certain extent, she had no close friends. This phenomenon was very abnormal in Mia's eyes. People could not live without friends. They could live without friends for a period of time, but not all the time. However, Nuwa Iyer was an exception. Most of her peers were not easy to communicate with. Her strength was far beyond the imagination of other children. Geniuses were lonely. Nuwa Iyer, who was already high above others and a genius, was even more lonely. And, although it was a little inappropriate to say this, Mia always felt that Nuwa Iyer was strange in the past 2 years. She remembered that once when she did something wrong and was supposed to be severely punished, the princess only stepped on her a few times. Nuwa Iyer was very light. She did not use much strength when stepping on her. She did not feel anything at all. Was this considered a punishment? And why did the princess look so excited after that? Well, the princess must not have the heart to punish me. She just wanted to go through the formalities. Mia thought so, and finally found a reasonable reason. Then, she was even more touched. Sob sob, the princess is too good to me. The servant girl thought about this and walked to the bedroom door. She knocked on the door and entered after receiving permission. Your Highness woke up so early today. Well, actually, I can't sleep. Facing Mia's exclamation, the golden-haired girl replied with a bitter smile. Noelle, who was very strict with her body, didn't expect that she would have such a situation where she couldn't sleep well because of some things. You can't sleep. This means that you really value Luoya. Probably. Facing Mia's smiling words, Nuwa Iyer was silent for a moment. Although she was a little shy, she did not refute. In Miss Angel's eyes, her own feelings weren't something that needed to be concealed to begin with. A ruler's emotions were something that needed to be displayed so that others could cooperate with her. And as the aggressor, she couldn't hide her emotions when facing the men of the Akhat family. Wei Dualia's teachings were deeply ingrained in Nuwa Iyer's heart. No matter if it was Ponte or Luoya, when facing these guys, she had to deal a heavy blow. It would be best if she could win with a single blow. Even if she could not win, she had to at least push the other competitors to the ground to prevent any accidents. Recalling the silver-haired girl beside Luoya, Nuwa Iyer sighed helplessly. In fact, she was already one step behind when she set off. Ai Lizzie and Luoya met earlier, and their relationship was already formed. If Nuwa Iyer tried to be the bad guy and ruin things, not only would she fail, she might even cause Luoya to dislike her. Furthermore, with her identity, it would be inappropriate. It would be easy for her to be misunderstood as a member of the royal family trying to sow discord between the members of the major noble families. Naturally, Nuwa Iyer would not do such a thing. Right now, the only thing that comforted her was that Ai Lizzie was still very naive. She did not directly reveal her feelings for Luoya. She was immersed in the intimacy brought by family, and she was probably afraid that saying such things would ruin their current relationship. Of course, it could also be due to her shyness as a girl. But none of this mattered. As long as she did not attack Nuwa Iyer, she would have plenty of opportunities. Mia picked up the bell on the table and shook it lightly. The crisp sound came from outside the door. A large group of maids swarmed in a few seconds after the bell rang. They tidied up the room, picked out a dress, and prepared makeup items needed later. Mia arranged for the princess to take a bath. The palace became busy. At the same time, in the labyrinth of the holy capital, Luoya was stunned by Anna's cold gaze and skillful makeup. Chapter 115. The royal palace of Saint Mestre was built 1,000 years ago. When humans first arrived in the West, the holy city of Lorraine was still one of the major hubs of the human race. It was used as a temporary command post. Later, after the founding of the theocracy, it was converted into a royal palace. It was one of the oldest buildings in the country. Being old meant being culturally profound, but physically, it meant being old. However, the royal palace of Saint Mestre had been renovated several times over the past 1,000 years. It had even been rebuilt once due to a great fire. The most recent renovation was a few decades ago. Therefore, it did not look like an ancient building. Instead, it looked very grand. The overall tone of the palace was wholly white. According to legend, it was the color of angel feathers that the architects had carefully mixed. Although Luoya did not know where the workers saw the angel feathers, the visual effect was indeed very good. It had a special sense of holiness. The design concept of the palace was also very straightforward. It was simple and elegant. To some extent, this style also reflected the style of the royal family. The Heathcliff family valued holiness as their beauty, so naturally, they did not have any fancy decorations. In the lounge of the palace, Luoya, who had just finished his tour of the palace for the first time, was drinking tea. He was thinking about the entire process of the ceremony over and over in his mind. By the way, is the saint's dagger finally going to be returned to me? The teenager muttered to himself, unconsciously touching the side of his waist. More than half a month ago, when he and Nuwa Iyer returned, although they were both unconscious, they had established a spell connection through the dagger. Bishop Philip did not dare to act rashly, so he summoned the people of the Holy Ceremonial Court. This group of people specialized in all kinds of ritual spells and could be considered experts in this field. After that, the two were sent to the Vatican for separate treatment. Those who did not know the details of the dagger thought that it belonged to Nuwa Iyer, so it did not follow Luoya back to Akkad's house. It was said that a blade was a warrior's lover. Although Luoya was not a warrior, he missed his battle partner very much. After all, the Holy One's dagger had saved his life several times in critical moments. Moreover, it was a dagger that had been opened by the Nuwa Iyer and his blood. It could be considered as a bond between the two of them. Now that it was about to be returned to its rightful owner, he was naturally happy. The main event of today's event started from the ceremony to Luoya receiving the protection of the royal family in front of everyone. After that, it was time for the banquet. Chapter 116. When Nuwa Iyer reached out her hand to stop Luoya from kneeling, Luoya was a little confused. Not kneeling in front of the king was normal in this world. After all, the king was only the head of the nobles. He didn't have absolute control over the nobles. However, it was different during the ceremony of receiving a title. It was a tradition to kneel on one knee to express respect. Don't kneel. Upon hearing Noel's words, the young man lifted his head and met the young lady's affectionate gaze. After pondering for a moment, he straightened his body. The moment he straightened his body, the crowd in the hall behind him was in an uproar. What's going on? Why did he stand up? Her Royal Highness asked him to stand up. Really? What's going on? The guests who had never seen such a scene began to discuss and speculate. Some said that it was normal for the ceremony to be different from a title. Some said that it was a change in the rules of the royal family. Some even guessed that it was an impromptu wedding. The audience was shocked, but what they didn't know was that the royal family and the staff were even more shocked. In the first row of the crowd, Prince Cain, who saw Noel's nonsense, couldn't help but turn his head and look at St. John with a frown. Father, isn't it a little inappropriate for Nuwa Iyer to do this? Inappropriate? What's inappropriate? The gray-haired St. John blinked his eyes when he heard Cain's words, as if he didn't understand what his son was talking about. His Royal Highness looked ahead and said, "It's really disrespectful to change the rules set by the ancestors. The process of the ceremony is messed up." Bishop John was stunned. He looked at his son as if he was looking at an idiot. His face was full of disdain. "Process my ass. Your daughter is flirting with a man. Our family is here today to do this. Can't you see it? I, John, was also proud of Saint Mestre's love saint. How did I give birth to such an idiot? Granddaughters are the best. I finally understand why a prince like you is the one who chose your wife." Why did you suddenly mention this? Cain, who was suddenly attacked by his father, was dumbfounded. John of the Holy See rolled his eyes and ignored him. The old man looked at the Nuwa Iyer in front of him and made a gesture of support. He also notified the etiquette officer. "Oh, right. I remember that the covenant ceremony doesn't require kneeling, right? Let's go with that." The blonde girl in front of him breathed a sigh of relief when she heard Hardadef's order. Luoya looked at the restless crowd in the hall and couldn't help but speak. "So you didn't have a plan?" "Yeah, I just changed my mind at the last minute." Nuwa Iyer held his sword and smiled. He seemed to be surprised by his own actions. "It's just a kneel. I don't really mind. If you want to kneel, I welcome it when there are only two of us. But forget it in front of outsiders. I don't like people I like kneeling to me." The overly ferocious straight ball hit Luoya's heart, causing the young man's heart to beat wildly. Even his breathing was almost broken. He looked at the Nuwa who put down the Holy King's sword according to the etiquette officer's instructions. He couldn't help but have a unique feeling in his heart. Your Royal Highness, the Covenant of Equality requires a token. What do you think of the short blade of the Holy King that is to be given to Luoya? Not bad. Let's use that. Upon hearing the etiquette officer's suggestion, Nuwa readily agreed. The short blade of the Holy King could be said to be an opportunity for her and Luoya to get closer. It was bathed in the blood of both of them. From this point of view, it was the most appropriate token. After a burst of noise, the hall quieted down again. Under the gaze of everyone, Nuwa stretched out her hand and raised the short blade in the shape of a white feather. She injected her power into it. The next moment, the short blade of the Holy King shone brightly, and a layer of halo shrouded the two of them. The Holy King had a spirit, and naturally, it would protect its master. Now that the two masters were in front of it, the short blade of the Holy King immediately became lively like a child who was reuniting with his parents. Its originally metallic blade became more and more lifelike, and the holy aura continued to spread. For a moment, it made the originally holy St. Cecil Hall look like a heavenly realm. The crowd began to scream and scream. This feeling, St. John and Prince Cain looked at each other. They both felt the holy aura sweep past them, and the bloodline power in their bodies began to stir. This strange feeling was obviously not the standard of a holy king, but in fact, the one who felt this feeling the most was Noel himself. Both the nobles and the officials understood one thing. That is, they might have witnessed an incredible scene, perhaps even historic. The crowd was excited and began to guess what had happened. Onlookers never complained about big things, let alone the live broadcast of the royal family's news. Marquis Kadia, who was in the first row of the crowd, looked at the short blade of St. John and almost guessed the reason. However, before he could think of an explanation, St. John suddenly stood up and opened his mouth to speak nonsense. Everyone, this is Shiya's blessing. As soon as St. John jumped up and spoke, Kadia was stunned. Marquis Kadia stared with his eyes wide open and found that Luoya was also stunned. In front of everyone's eyes, St. John's face didn't turn red and he didn't pant. His face was as holy as if he had been enlightened by God. He waved his hand and pointed at the two children in front of him. This is Shiya's gift. The great mother goddess has recognized their oath. They are a pair blessed by Shiya. This is fate and God's will. Let us bless these two children. May they always maintain their original hearts. Oh! John of the Holy See defined the two of them in just a few sentences, and it immediately caused a huge commotion. The devout believers began to kneel down in joy, and the girls who were eager to gossip began to scream. The venue was in an uproar, and everyone's emotions were stirred up. Kadia looked at the scene that was almost out of control. He could only attribute St. John's actions to increase the cohesion of the church. He glanced sideways at the silver-haired girl who hadn't said a word since she came in and just stared at her Royal Highness. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. If it had been anyone else spouting this nonsense, Kadia would have stood up and retorted for Elisa's sake. However, the one who was spouting this nonsense was the king of St. Maester Theocracy, John of the Holy See. No one present dared to say anything. Sorry, AI Lizzie, we'll have to bear with it for now. Kadia sighed. He could only make up his mind to help AI Lizzie in the future. As for now, he would just treat it as the darkest night before dawn. After all, the Holy Capital was Her Royal Highness's home ground. But it would be different if they returned to Akkad Hill. No matter how powerful Nuwa was, could he chase her all the way to her house? Kadia shook his head and laughed. He looked forward. After the ceremony was completed, the sacred music of the Holy See began to play. Chapter 118. In the noisy hall, Luoya was busy farming. However, while he was in high spirits, the silent flames of war had been ignited on the other side. On the other side of the hall, two beautiful girls were silently looking at each other. Neither of them spoke, but the cold atmosphere made the people nearby feel that something was wrong. The noblewomen began to exchange information. There were quite a few people who had seen Elisa at the birthday banquet. Soon, the girl's identity became known to everyone. A group of noblewomen and young ladies began to look at her with fiery eyes. That child is Luoya, Sama's adopted sister. That is to say, Sure, lower your voice. There is no evidence yet. What evidence do we need? Look at the atmosphere over there. I'm afraid Her Highness is in trouble. The noblewomen and bureaucrats watched the battle excitedly from a distance, as if they were witnessing a duel between two swordsmen at the top of the Forbidden City. On the other side, Katia glanced over and her expression changed. She hurried over to chat with John of the Holy See and the others. AI Lizzie, if you have something to say it quickly. Time is precious. It won't be good if he sees us. Nuwa Iyer glanced at Luoya, who was still busy on the other side. She looked at AI Lizzie in front of her and felt helpless. AI Lizzie's identity had its own difficulties. It made it difficult for Luoya to perceive the difference between family and love. However, it also had its own unique advantages. For example, if anyone wanted to get close to Luoya, it would be impossible for them to fall out with AI Lizzie. Nuwa Iyer didn't know if Luoya would be an exception, but she didn't want to try. It wasn't easy for her to get close to Luoya, and she didn't want to complicate things at this time. Miss Angel stared at AI Lizzie's red eyes and felt nervous. She was afraid that this child would make things difficult and make things too ugly. If that happened, it would be troublesome if Luoya noticed. However, it turned out that her worries were unnecessary. Greetings, Your Highness. I don't have any other intentions this time. I'm just here to greet you. It doesn't matter if my elder brother sees me. Is that so? If that's the case, then I welcome it. If our relationship is too stiff, it won't do us any good. Please be at ease. As long as Your Highness is still the power that protects Lord Big Brother, I will not unreasonably criticize you. After all, Lord Big Brother's safety is more important than anything else. I see. Upon hearing AI Lizzie's words, Nuwa Iyer's expression relaxed a little. She suddenly felt that Luoya's love for her wasn't without reason. This child still knew her priorities. Luoya might seem to be safe now, but there were still many pairs of eyes watching him. For example, the secret silver monastery that wanted to kill him because of his bloodline. There were many strange organizations like this that had a grudge with the Akkad family. According to John of the Holy See, most of the awakened bloodline of the Akkad family were short-lived. Generations of awakened bloodlines all died young. This curse had undoubtedly become a sore spot for the Nuwa Iyer. It seems like you value him a lot. Of course, I love Lord Big Brother. I can't tolerate any harm to him. The silver-haired girl covered her chest with her hand as she spoke. The expression on her face instantly melted into a smile. This warm smile was fleeting, but the irresistible charm made everyone's heart skip a beat. Before I can personally protect him, there's nothing wrong with letting you take his place. Take his place? You really dare to say that? Do you think you can surpass me in the future? Wait a minute. The blonde girl's expression changed halfway through her words. Her pair of blue eyes stared deeply at the girl in front of her. Her pupils couldn't help but flash with surprise. This feeling, she was about to reach source level 5. How was this possible? She had seen AI Lizzie at Nuwa Iyer's birthday party. At that time, she was still an ordinary girl who didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. In a short 2 months, she was already about to obtain source form? A chill ran down Nuwa Iyer's spine, and she became vigilant. She narrowed her eyes as she looked at the girl who dared to provoke her. An unprecedented sense of danger rose in her heart. When it comes to protecting Lord Big Brother, of course it's up to whoever is more qualified to do it. Am I right, Your Highness? So that's how it is. I've really been looked down upon. Nuwa Iyer stepped forward with a smile on her face. Although she didn't release any curse energy, her entire aura suddenly became stronger. Take my place? Hee. If you can do it, then try. I'll let you understand the difference in strength. The two of them looked at each other, the flames in their hearts silently igniting. AI Lizzie had found a target worth surpassing, while Nuwa Iyer felt the urgency of being chased. The two most talented girls in the theocracy had been stimulated by a single person just like that. As a result, There were 3 sets of flames in the hall. Luo Ayer's side was the most popular. Countless nobles and officials shook his hand and thanked him profusely. Nuo Ayer's side was full of fighting spirit. The 2 girls refused to back down under the crowd of women. As for the third, it was Kadia. Chapter 119. Can't go back? Father, what do you mean? Luoya listened to Kadia's words and was stunned for a moment. Obviously, he did not understand the meaning of this sentence. The murderous aura is so strong. Why does it have the smell of, "I won't let you out of this door today," after the failure of a gang negotiation? What's the situation? The royal family arranged 300 axemen nearby? It doesn't make sense. Perhaps seeing Luo Ya's strange expression, the Marquis hurriedly added another sentence. It's work. Something happened in the military, so I probably can't go home with you. That's what I mean. So that's what you mean. Father, can you not scare me? Wait, did you just get the news? Well, Prince Cain just informed a few of our senior members of the Knights. After the banquet, the officials of the military will probably have to stay. Kadia sighed and was obviously worried. Luoya heard this and suddenly felt that things were not good. No matter what, it was still during the banquet, and the main character was Nuo Ayer at the St. Cecil Hall. Needless to say, it was even bigger than a birthday banquet. What kind of urgent matter needed to be communicated at this kind of banquet? And speaking of the military will have to stay. Luoya looked back at the number of people wearing military uniforms coming and going in the hall. There were at least 100 people. If all of them stayed, it would be too big of a commotion. Father, is it convenient to say what's the matter? Luoya asked Kadia in a low voice. The Marquis hesitated and sighed. Forget it. Anyway, you will know later. Signs of mutants have been found in the security area of Tuk Fortress. What? Mutants? Lower your voice. Before Luo Ya's words came out, Kadia reached out and covered his mouth. The father and son glanced around and were relieved when they found that no one was paying attention. This is confidential military information. It hasn't been announced yet because of fear of causing panic. Don't talk nonsense. I understand, but isn't this a little too big? Luoya swallowed a mouthful of saliva. His heartbeat sped up when he heard the news. Traces of the mutants. These few words didn't seem like much, but to those who had some military knowledge, it was like a bolt from the blue. The reason was that this wasn't like hunting. Even if you saw the traces of the mutants, you might not necessarily see them. Once you found the traces of the mutants, it was basically a prelude to war. There was a saying at the border that there were only 2 kinds of mutants. One was that there were none, and the other was that they were everywhere. The Great Migration at the end of the Second Era was no joke. It was a journey that was measured in years. They had to travel such a long distance before they found this paradise. Then, the question was, the mutants had traveled such a long distance to the current human world. Could they be here for a vacation? Since the cost of investment was high, the desire for results was naturally high. It was the same for the mutants. Therefore, every time they discovered traces of these mutants, there was basically no peace. They would definitely try to attack the humans. Counting the years, it had been more than 80 years since the mutants last invaded the West. From a historical perspective, it was not that long ago. Why did they suddenly appear again? Luoya, calm down. Although this is a serious matter, it might not be the worst. Kadia patted the nervous young man's shoulder and explained the current situation from a professional's point of view. Luoya relaxed a little after hearing this. It turned out that there were many such cases in history. The 2 fortresses in the east of the human world would encounter such situations every few decades. However, most of the time, the mutants who came were not strong enough and were forced to retreat. The famous 4 invasions to the west were actually cases of failed defense. As long as it can be defended, it is not a big deal. The people will not know about it. This should be the case this time. Is that so? That's good. Luoya looked at Kadia, who was still calm, and let out a sigh of relief. As a family member of a soldier, the possible war was a small-scale defensive battle. This kind of news made him feel a lot more at ease. Well, don't worry too much. Maintain a good mood. You are the main character of this banquet. Kadia patted Luoya's back and urged him to quickly return. The black-haired young man's face showed a difficult expression. It's too difficult to pretend that I didn't hear about it. After sighing and adjusting for a while, Luoya squeezed out a smile on his face. He raised his head and puffed out his chest as he walked towards the new ayah. When the princess saw him, she immediately walked a few steps forward. Chapter 120. Luoya Akat was very touched. As the saying goes, a daughter is a father's little jacket. Although Luoya is not a father and is only a brother, Ai Lizzie is truly heartwarming. Caressing Ai Lizzie, who threw herself into his arms and combing her glowing silver hair with his fingers, Luoya's heart gradually calmed down. As for Ai Lizzie Akat felt that her brother was too difficult. Brother Luoya, her big brother who grew up alone, had experienced too much. His mother died when he was young, and his father could not be by his side. When he was young, his supernatural power awakened slowly, and he was once judged to have no supernatural talent. It was not easy for them to meet each other and rely on each other for warmth. However, they encountered the rude and unreasonable royal family. From that weird old man to the unreasonable princess, they all wanted to use her elder brother. What a bunch of bad people, Ai Lizzie thought angrily. It was obvious that she had a prejudice against Heathcliff. She felt that her peaceful life with Luoya gradually deviated from the path after coming to the holy capital and meeting Nuwa Ayar. And now, Luoya, who had experienced so much, had to face the impact of starting a new family. This cruel reality made Ai Lizzie unable to bear it. Whoa, why does this world always want to hurt brother Luoya? Under Ai Lizzie's unique filter, Luoya was already the perfect representative. Any dissatisfaction was persecution and suppression. Thinking so, the girl's eyes welled up with tears, and her little head rubbed against the boy's chest a few times. Big brother, do you think father will listen to our advice and give up? As soon as Ai Lizzie said this, Luoya was stunned. Looking at the girl's crying appearance, his heart ached, and he sighed inwardly. Yes, Elisa's father died on the battlefield. Now that she was finally able to live a peaceful life in the Akat family, she didn't expect that her adoptive father would also have to go to the battlefield. This must have stimulated her psychological shadow. The black-haired boy's expression was conflicted, but he could not give an answer that could make Ai Lizzie feel at ease. It should be very difficult. After all, to a certain extent, it might be his wish. Thinking of Kadia, who was so focused on his career that he even neglected his territory, Luoya could not help but rub his eyebrows. Not to mention his father's dedication to his job, Roja didn't think that Kadia was the kind of person who would cower in the face of a war with the aliens. Soldiers, especially soldiers who defended their country, were mostly unyielding and courageous. Seeing their comrades die on the battlefield, the first reaction of many of them was not to retreat, but to seek revenge. Seeing that the situation at the front was not good, many of them did not panic, but chose to go to the battlefield personally. Asking Kadia to retreat at this time was simply a fool's dream, and it would also damage his reputation. Sometimes, nobles even valued their reputation more than their lives. As a son, Luoya naturally could not do anything that would ruin his father's reputation. But I think it's wrong to completely ignore our children. We should at least listen to your opinion on this matter. Ai Lizzie was still trying her best with tears in her eyes. No matter what, she could not ignore Luoya, who was part of the family when it came to reorganizing the family. Furthermore, Luoya was the only child. If Kadia remarried and had the intention of having a second child, then Luoya's advantage as an only child would disappear. Losing the identity of an only child, Kadia being deceived by a vixen, Luoya losing the right to inherit the family. This long series of plot lines formed in Ai Lizzie's mind in just a few seconds, and it made her even more uneasy. I must not let something like this happen to Big Brother. Ai Lizzie clenched her small fists as she thought so, and her entire person became resolute. Big Brother, if it's not convenient for you to say it, then how about I do it? You do it? Yes, leave it to me to make father change his mind. The silver-haired girl looked resolutely at Luoya's golden eyes. Luoya blinked and could not help but ponder. Wait, if Ai Lizzie were to say it, the effect would be better than if I were to say it? After all, Kadia was her guardian, and he promised to take good care of her. Although it was impossible to make Kadia completely give up on the idea of going to the battlefield, even if he could only retreat to the second line of logistics, it would be much better than going to the eastern border and starving. Thinking of this, Luoya nodded slightly, and his eyes gradually brightened. "AI Lizzie, then I'll leave this matter to you. Don't worry, do it boldly. Whether it succeeds or not, I won't blame you." "Yes, I understand." AI Lizzie clenched her fists, feeling that she had understood the essence of the matter. Luoya's eyes also lit up, and it was obvious that he had high hopes for her. In this situation of mutual trust, the two finished their dinner and began to read in the study while waiting for Kadia to return home. Chapter 121. On the second day after Luoya was granted the position of acting overlord, Kadia left. As the saying goes, before the troops and horses are mobilized, the army's supply line has always been the most important part of military operations. Although the route used to send supplies to the eastern Tark fortress was still there, it was only suitable for the current situation. After the appearance of the mutants, according to the agreement, the various countries would increase the number of troops to defend the area they were in charge of. It was inevitable that the population of the eastern border would skyrocket. Under such circumstances, the daily transportation volume would increase by more than 10 times. Simply put, after a few decades, the human countries needed to build roads again, and this road was quite long. But fortunately, there was a foundation left behind before, so strictly speaking, it was only building roads. This task undoubtedly fell on the head of the logistics department. As the head of the logistics department, Kadia had to personally go to the site to inspect, and was also the first batch of soldiers to leave the army. After waving goodbye to Kadia at the door in the morning, Luoya looked at his father and the soldiers who left with a serious face and sighed. Although Luoya had discussed the issue of the territory with Kadia several times, he had never thought of being an acting overlord. In the end, managing a department and managing all the departments were two completely different concepts, and the many complicated matters were enough to give him a headache. But fortunately, Kadia still had a sense of law. Yesterday, he had drafted a power of attorney and had the palace notarize it overnight. As long as there was this thing, Luoya wouldn't be considered as taking up the post without a certificate. But in the entire theocracy, there weren't many people who dared to investigate him, so this thing was at most icing on the cake. After Kadia left, Luoya and AI Lizzie also began to prepare to return to the territory. Thinking of this, Luoya felt very convinced. It had been almost 3 months since Nuwa Ayer's birthday party last year, and Akate territory had been idling without anyone, but everything was still as usual, as expected of an ancestor who had thrown his responsibilities to the wind. He had completely turned into a feudal lord. For the entire day, Luoya and AI Lizzie were thinking about what to bring and what to purchase. After all, the Saint capital was the most prosperous place in Saint Mestre, and there were some things that couldn't be bought elsewhere. Usually, nobles would greet their friends before leaving and even meet up with them. However, Luoya and AI Lizzie didn't need to do so. At most, they would send someone to inform the palace. Then, before noon, the person who informed them came back. However, he didn't come back on his own. Instead, he came back with a large number of guards and the royal family's carriage. All right, to a certain extent, Luoya had already guessed that this might be the case, so she wasn't too surprised. AI Lizzie's little face, on the other hand, puffed up. But as a noble, she knew that it was a friendly gesture for her to pay a visit before she left, so she could only pinch her nose and acquiesce to the vixen's arrival. "If that's the case, are you leaving tomorrow?" In the living room, Nuwa Ayer looked at the siblings sitting opposite her and sighed. Naturally, she couldn't bear to part with Luoya. However, AI Lizzie was also an interesting person. As a competitor, she felt a sense of crisis. If the conditions allowed, Nuwa Ayer would like to compete with this child. Losing both her lover and her competitor meant that the life of the princess would once again become dull and dull. To be honest, Nuwa Ayer wasn't too happy. However, she also knew how important a territory was to a noble, so naturally, she couldn't say anything to dissuade them. Of course, This was because Nuwa Iyer didn't know about the great achievements of the Akhat territory's governance. She didn't know that there was such a big noble family in the world who didn't care about anything. Otherwise, she might have really made them stay for another 2 months. You should already know about the military situation, right? The mutants? Yes, I heard from my father. Uncle Kadia should have already left, right? He left early this morning. I am now the acting lord, so it is reasonable for me to return to the territory as soon as possible. Nuwa Iyer understood Luo Ya's answer. However, after glancing at AI Lizzie, Miss Angel decisively stated her request. You can go back, but you have to write to me. Write to me? Yes, I am your protector. It is my duty to understand your situation. Let me think. 1 letter a week. Nuwa Iyer smiled and said the communication frequency, which immediately caused AI Lizzie to be dissatisfied. Your Highness, not to mention how useful writing letters can be in protecting Brother Luoya. 1 letter a week is too frequent, right? Brother is busy as the acting lord. I don't think it is good to add to his burden. I don't think it is a burden to write to me. In fact, this is the first time I have asked someone to write to me. Luoya, do you hate it? No, I don't mean that. Facing the princess who looked as if her pride was hurt, Luoya hurriedly waved her hand to deny it. Nuwa Iyer smirked and once again confronted AI Lizzie. Miss AI Lizzie, although you are Luo Ya's adopted sister, that doesn't mean you can represent him. Who knows, maybe the things you hate are the things he likes the most. Hee, your Highness really knows how to joke. I know brother very well, more than anyone else. Sometimes, it is the other person's wishful thinking. Luoya looked at the two who were staring at each other without backing down. She silently lowered her head and turned into a stone statue. She followed the three-nose principle of not speaking, not moving, and not looking. Chapter 122. 1 day later, in the evening. In front of the convoy with the Akhat family emblem, there was chaos at this time. On the plains outside the official road, a group of strange animals were running across the official road. It was a kind of four-legged animal similar to a sheep with 2 horns on its head. Its fur was white with gold, and its cry was a bit like a deer. It was very flexible when it ran. Its name was Golden Lamb. It was a famous monster that represented luck in Shia. It was also an animal whose whole body was priceless. Although Golden Lamb had gold in its name, there was actually no gold in its shining wool. The gold referred to its value after being sold. The fur of a golden lamb was equivalent to a gold coin of the same weight. This was a famous illusion in the past. Needless to say, the ornamental value of the golden wool had always been the highest level raw material for luxurious clothes of the noble women. It had always been in short supply. Saint Mestre was still fine. In the Austin Empire, people believed that wearing clothes made of golden wool would bring good luck. Clothes with a little golden wool were more than twice as expensive as other clothes. In addition to the wool, the horn of the golden lamb was also a rare curse material. Its head could be used as an ornament, and its meat was famous for being delicious. It had always been in the top 3 in the rankings of famous chefs, but it was not easy to catch. In short, it was a treasure. Such an animal suddenly passed by in front of people. In the eyes of people, it was almost the same as a pile of gold coins jumping there. Luoya knew the moment he saw the golden lamb that the opportunity had come. The black-haired boy looked at the soldiers who were ready to move, but restrained because of discipline. He knew that the time to show his leadership and strength had come. He opened the door and looked into the distance. Then he ordered loudly, "Captain, come out." After the order was issued, the Akhat military officer and the captain of the royal guards walked out of the crowd. Under Luo Ya's inquiry, they explained the characteristics of this monster in a few words. It turned out that one of the main reasons why these golden lambs were not easy to catch was because their wool was very unique. It was fine for slashing and cutting, but it was extremely resistant to arrows and piercing damage. It was almost impossible to kill it. If one wanted to kill it, they would have to chase after it and hack it to death. Their combat strength was not very high, and a source rank 6 would be able to take down one by themselves. As soon as Luoya heard that they needed to chase after the sheep, he immediately mounted his horse. Under the golden afterglow of the setting sun, a group of armored soldiers began to chase after the sheep. Unfortunately, the speed of a horse carrying a person was not great. They chased after the sheep all the way to the edge of the forest, but they still could not catch up. The soldiers could not help but become anxious. It was fine if they didn't see it, but even if they did, how could they let these gold coins and good ingredients run away? The commander of the Akkad private army, Duke, was anxious. He was already considering whether or not to dismount and try to chase after the sheep. After all, Duke was a source rank 4. Not to mention the long distance, it was still very easy for him to sprint faster than a horse. However, before the commander of the army could make up his mind, the running people found something strange. A powerful spell suddenly appeared in the team. When the soldiers felt it, they turned around and saw the young master Luoya, who they were supposed to protect, flying over their heads like a cannonball. At this time, Luoya's body was wrapped in white light. He held a silver blade in his hand, and a pair of wings of light appeared on his shoulders. After soaring into the sky and flying at high speed for a while, the black-haired young man fell to the ground like a meteor. With a loud bang, he smashed into the edge of the forest in front of the golden lambs. In the smoke screen, a terrifying aura rolled out, and a huge and terrifying shadow suddenly appeared in the sky where the light and darkness met. At this moment, the running golden lambs stopped as if they were collectively immobilized. They trembled under the gaze of the shadow. Those who were in a better state curled up on the ground, and those who weren't in a good state directly fell to the ground and couldn't get up. Of course, this powerful deterrence didn't only affect the monsters. The horses of the knights also stopped at the same time. There was a burst of people shouting and horses neighing, and some even began to run back in fright. Not good. We accidentally hurt our allies. That's enough, Goulandair. Well, these little things really can't be scared. Glancing at the knights who were in a hurry in the distance, the shadow of the Goulandair finally faded away. The huge skeleton didn't leave. It began to look at the soldiers and Luoya and began to talk about the animals of his time. Although the horses of my time weren't big, they were all quite good-looking. They could even grow horns on their heads. They were much better than these. Big brother, you're talking about unicorns, right? Luoya rubbed his chin as he listened to the words of the Goulandair. He felt that there were only two possibilities for a horse that wasn't afraid of a giant. It was either the king of horses or the retard of horses. The black-haired young man listened to the rambling of the lonely giant. On the other hand, the soldiers on the other side were terrified. The pressure of the Goulandair was too strong. Not to mention these animals, even humans would have a great deal of fear. Chapter 123. Under a hill beside the official road, Duke and the others were setting up camp. Because of the last-minute hunt, the speed of Luoya's convoy was greatly slowed down. If they wanted to get to the town to rest, they would have to march through the night. For the Akkad private army and palace guards who prioritized the safety of Luoya and Ai Lizzie, this was too risky. Being ambushed at night was no joke. Many important people had failed miserably at night. Even if Duke had full confidence in his subordinates and palace guards, he didn't want to take unnecessary risks. Also, the current atmosphere wasn't suitable for marching. How many sheep are we going to kill? There are so many of us. We can't possibly eat all of them, right? Originally, the chefs wanted to kill 3, but the young master said that it wasn't enough to reward the whole army, so he added 2 more. Really? Shia bless Lord Luoya. A few soldiers who were skillfully building the barracks chatted happily, looking forward to the delicious food in the story. This was also the current atmosphere of the entire camp. The excited soldiers had smiles on their faces. The campfire was being prepared. The servants were preparing chairs for Luoya and Ai Lizzie, and the chefs were working hard to harvest the wool of the golden lambs that were already slaughtered by the soldiers. Brother Luoya, the wool of these sheep is very precious. Should we try to raise them? We can't do that. I've asked. After the golden lambs lose their wool, they will sense danger and speed up the process of mutation. Soon after, they will turn into a ferocious fawn. At that time, not only will they have no wool, their meat will also become hard. I see. No wonder the golden wool is so rare. It turns out that each sheep can only be harvested once. Yes, our hunt this time can be considered to have removed the hidden danger of monsters nearby. Otherwise, it would be difficult to deal with these sheep when they grow up. Luoya looked at the worker who was harvesting the sheep's wool. He felt that he had really gained both fame and fortune. AI Lizzie nodded her little head and looked at the young man beside her thoughtfully. Luoya and the others had chased after them for a long distance, so AI Lizzie didn't sense the power of the Goulandair. However, this didn't mean that she didn't notice anything strange. AI Lizzie saw the reverence in the eyes of the returning soldiers, Duke's warm attitude, and the subservient attitude of the palace guards. She immediately sensed that something was wrong. He heard that these sheep were stopped by Brother Luoya. It seemed that Brother Luoya had become a lot stronger recently. AI Lizzie thought back to a few months ago. At that time, Luoya was only at source grade 6. It was impossible for him to be admired by this group of elite soldiers above source grade 5. Brother Luoya never told me about supernatural powers. AI Lizzie thought about this inside. Because she hid the fact that she cultivated supernatural powers, Luoya had always treated her as a weak and ordinary girl. Although this allowed her to enjoy her brother's love, it also made it difficult for AI Lizzie to recognize Luoya's strength. He shouldn't be at source grade 4, right? AI Lizzie thought with a little guilty conscience. She already knew that Duke was at source grade 4 from Kadia. This military officer was serious and valued strength the most. Now that Duke was acting so respectfully, perhaps Luoya really was. AI Lizzie started to think that other people's supernatural powers were rising at the same speed as her own. She started to make baseless guesses and felt that she was too lazy. No, I still have to work hard. The silver-haired girl clenched her small fist. She was determined to protect Luoya. She felt that she had to catch up to her brother's footsteps. Moreover, considering Nuaire, the situation was even more urgent. AI Lizzie's journey of cheating sped up again. Luoya was watching the Akit family chef's work. Of the 5 lambs that were slaughtered on the spot, 4 were roasted whole lambs, and the caramel reaction was used to produce the most delicious taste. The remaining one was used to stew soup with the mountain delicacies that the soldiers collected from nearby. The soldiers who were given the task of collecting the herbs had high morale. They had been outside for many years and were very clear about which wild plants were edible and which were tasty. They dug around in the forest and dug out many good things. Luoya looked at the mountain of mountain herbs and felt that Akit should develop this area. For example, in his previous life, Luoya's White Mountain, Old Ginseng was a key area for a period of time. While Luoya, who saw everything as gold coins, was thinking, the other side had already started cooking. Not long after the 4 golden lambs were placed on the fire, a thick fragrance began to spread in the camp. Duke saw this and hurriedly increased the number of soldiers on duty, worried that the delicious food would attract wild beasts. After a busy period, the sun had completely set and the celebration feast began. Luoya and AI Lizzie enjoyed 1 golden lamb alone. The other 3 were left for the soldiers and officers in the camp. But in reality, with Luoya and AI Lizzie's appetite, they could only eat a few pieces of meat cut from the good parts. The rest would be given to the soldiers. Roasted whole lamb was not a delicate dish. The secret of the delicious taste was the quality of the ingredients. The golden lamb could be said to be the best in this aspect. The fat was evenly distributed, the meat was juicy, and the texture melted in the mouth. It was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. When eating, one had to look at the food and the atmosphere. Although the environment in the wilderness was not elegant enough, the smoke rising from the plains had a unique charm. The sound of laughter echoed in the ears. It was different from the exquisite banquets of the nobles, but it had a free and happy atmosphere. Brother, don't you need some wine to relieve your boredom? No, no one drinks. I am no exception. Chapter 124. Someone from Sorophia is here, and we need to inform him? Beside the campfire, Luoya looked at the confused Duke, his small eyes filled with doubt. What's going on? Why would Sorophia suddenly appear? And to inform him once someone arrives, could it be Kadia also took out loans when he was young? Saint Mestre's king of moneylenders, Luoya, suddenly felt a chill down his spine. It wasn't that Luoya was maliciously speculating about his father, but there were too many nobles who did this. Developing a territory usually required a large amount of funds, and the amount would depend on the scale of the development. However, it was obvious that most of the nobles wouldn't pay the full amount out of their own pockets. It was just like buying a house. There were people who paid the full amount, but that was only because they were rich and overbearing. Most of them would pay the down payment first, and then slowly work their way up. In Luoya's previous life, the financial institution was a bank, but in this world, it was a merchant association. Generally speaking, before developing a territory, the feudal lord would contact the local merchant association, and the merchant association would set the interest rate and pay a portion of the money. The territory would pay a portion of the money back every year, and it would take a few years or even a few decades to pay off the debt. Of course, this was only the simplest model. In reality, there were many things that could be discussed during the negotiations. For example, most feudal lords wanted the merchant association to be in charge of the logistics of the development of the territory. The nobles didn't know where the most durable tools were, so the merchant association had to send out experienced merchants to purchase them. The merchant association would also accept missions in exchange for some benefits and convenience, turning into a red-top merchant for a while. Generally speaking, developing a territory together with the merchant association was a mutually beneficial matter. However, as the saying goes, the greater the profit, the greater the risk. If the development failed, it would be a heavy blow to the noble family and the merchant association. As the largest merchant association in Xia, the Sorofia Merchant Association had developed countless territories together with the local feudal lords. Of course, there were some that succeeded, but there were a few that failed, and the feudal lords owed Sorofia a huge debt. Could it be that his father had done some development when he was young? Or that one of his ancestors had done some work and owed money to Sorofia, the head of the capitalists, and was now being asked to repay the debt? Luoya's face turned green when he thought of this possibility. Damn it, he had already shouldered a debt of 500,000 yuan. If he had to repay his father's debt, then Luoya might as well sell himself to Nuair as a pet. Did our territory engage in any large-scale development projects in the past? The black-haired young man carefully asked Duke. The middle-aged man blinked his eyes and smiled, which was a rare sight. Ha ha ha, young master, look at what you're saying. We are Akhat territory. How could we possibly engage in territorial development? What the hell? You're quite proud, aren't you? Luoya looked at Duke, who had an expression that said, Young master, you're thinking too much. He suddenly felt that his ancestors were really something else. They could actually cultivate the pride of not developing their territory. How the hell did they do it? The young man rubbed his temples as he thought of this. He suddenly felt that it was a mistake for Heathcliff to give so much land to the Akhat family 1,000 years ago. Perhaps the royal family didn't expect this at that time. The Akhat family had generations of ambitious young men who would rather die than inherit their family's billions of assets. After generations, the billions of assets were about to grow, and the Akhat family was still keen on fighting. After silently complaining in his heart for a while, Luoya finally felt relieved. There shouldn't be any money owed to Sorofia. Then it's fine. Although Sorofia was powerful, the Akhat family wasn't bad either. The 5 grasshead kings of the theocracy weren't just for show. Sorofia might be a strong dragon in other places, but in Akhat territory, he really couldn't beat the local snake. Thinking of this, Luoya's confidence swelled. He was most afraid that he was in the wrong. As long as he didn't sign any contract with Sorofia, Luoya could ignore them. Besides, Luoya had sold them a high-quality requiem lamp before. Strictly speaking, he had formed a good relationship with Sorofia, so he should be thanking him. But speaking of Sorofia, I remember that in the game. The black-haired young man whispered in a low voice, and the figure of a girl with reddish-brown hair and emerald pupils appeared in his mind. Xiaoluot Sorofia, the eldest daughter of the Sorofia family, and also one of the 4 female protagonists of the game Eye of the Recorder. Luoya's memory of the game was a bit blurry, and he didn't have much impression of this woman. He only remembered that she was a cold beauty. Xiaoluot's coldness was different from AI Lizi's. AI Lizi's coldness was a kind of cold and arrogant temperament, while Xia Luo's coldness was her attitude towards people. She wasn't exactly a 3-nothingness, and it wasn't the kind of coldness that was targeted at someone. Instead, it was a natural personality that kept people at arm's length. In other words, Charlotte was a girl who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. The Sorofia family had a strange personality that seemed to be inherited from their family. They were especially stubborn, and they clearly distinguished between love and hate. This could be seen from their family history. Chapter 125. 1 month later, Akat territory. Early in the morning, a beautifully decorated carriage slowly came from the end of the street. The logo on the carriage was somewhat unique. It was a strange pattern of an eye above a candle flame. If it was in a foreign country, it would probably be regarded as the symbol of a cult. However, in Akat territory, this symbol was already known to everyone. At least in this month, its popularity had greatly increased. Of course, along with the candle flame symbol, there was another name, Luoya in Akat. The current acting lord of Akat territory, the young master of the Marquis Mansion. For some unknown reason, he completely grasped the power of the territory and was now the #1 person in the Akat territory's government. It was admittedly good to have so many resounding titles, but when these titles were placed on the head of a 10-year-old child, the world's doubts would fill the sky and earth. Even though many officials didn't say anything, they still had some objections to Marquis Kadia's decision. One must know that Marquis Kadia was a well-known figure in the theocracy. No matter where he went, his name was well known. Although he was a little weak in governing the territory, he was still a big tree. Under the big tree, it was cool to enjoy the shade. The resistance to change and the nostalgia to beautify the past could be said to be a common human behavior. When Luoya first took office, his support among the people was actually quite low. However, no one expected that this situation would quickly change in just a short month. The carriage wheels turned and arrived at the entrance of the territory's government office. The door opened, the coachman placed the ladder, and the beautiful maid got off the carriage first and stood respectfully by the side. This scene had become a daily routine for the nearby residents in the past month, and it also became the focus of everyone's attention. When the black-haired youth's figure walked out of the carriage, and the moment his handsome and tender cheeks appeared, many passers-by stopped to look. The young girls who saw Luoya for the first time let out a short cry, and the women living nearby couldn't help but take a few more glances. Oh, he's so good-looking. This was what most people were thinking at this moment. As he grew older, Luoya's achievements in the field of facial recognition were getting higher and higher. There were almost no flaws in his image, and humans were creatures that were dominated by vision to a certain extent. Luoya's popularity soared like a rocket as the number of times she appeared in public increased. Every evening, more and more young girls pretended to pass by on the streets. Some of them even rented houses nearby. Luoya was actually quite helpless against these users who only cared about appearances. These groups of fans reminded him of some bad things from his previous life. Fortunately, these people were more rational. Come to think of it, Nuair seemed to be in the same situation as well. In fact, it was even more serious than Luoya. After all, the royal family had always been the center of gossip, be it in the previous life or the present. Thinking of this, Luoya felt a little more comfortable. After getting off the carriage, he looked around. Many people around him saluted him, and Luoya nodded his head in greeting. As it turned out, Luoya could rely on his face to make a living. However, how could he, who had great ambitions to clean up the mess left by his ancestors, do that? A lot of debt constantly urged him to improve, telling him that if he wanted to make a living, he had to rely on his talent. A month ago, when Luoya took over the power of the territory, the first thing he thought about was how to unite the people. During the transition between the old and the new, the officials lacked a sense of identity with the new leader. The civilians didn't care about politics and didn't know about the new leader. This was a very common phenomenon before the mass media coverage. Luoya's situation was especially serious because of his age. Expanding his influence became his priority, and he had to do it quickly. Speed was the most important thing in war. At such a critical moment, Luoya naturally couldn't be careless. Without saying a word, he took out 3 axes. The first one was to rectify the law and order. Although the Achaite territory had the best law and order among the 5 noble families, it was actually referring to the overall environment. Most of the judgments were based on the number of bandits in the territory, whether the roads were smooth and safe, and other factors that were beneficial to the merchants. However, for the citizens of Achaite City, some of the evildoers were more harmful to their lives. Petty thieves, ruffians, gangsters, loan sharks, and even human traffickers. These were the mountains that pressed down on the citizens. They often had a negative or even irreversible impact on their normal lives. Luoya, who had seen a lot of these evil forces in his previous life, hated them to the core. He was determined not to allow such vermin to run rampant in his territory. Thus, the slogan "Eliminate Evil," which had never appeared in the theocracy before, was launched with Luoya's strong support. Luoya carefully selected the law enforcement officers. Luoya didn't touch the city guards and the militia. On one hand, he was afraid that they would collude with the local evil forces. On the other hand, he was worried that they weren't strong enough. Luoya, who had seen a lot of extraordinaries, had a little side effect recently. He estimated the strength of his opponents as high as possible. In addition, this was a special period, so he was really cautious to the extreme. Under such guidance, Luoya only had one choice left. That was the most loyal people, the Achaite private army and the palace guards who would escort him. Thus, Duke, who was at source grade 4, personally took the lead. All of them were at source grade 5. As a local, Duke's sources of information were too wide. The first time he worked for Luoya, he was even more enthusiastic. In less than a week, he sent over a list of 100 people. The crimes on the list were roughly divided into 3 categories. The first category was people who committed murder and human traffickers. The second category was people who hurt people and indirectly caused the destruction of people's families. The third category was people who robbed, extorted, stole, and fled the city. For this list, Luoya first demanded that the evidence must be conclusive. He couldn't be biased. After ensuring that the list was correct, he immediately ordered a heavy strike. First of all, the human traffickers had to be killed, especially those who abducted children. Luoya's guidelines for these kinds of criminals were to hang them all. Not a single one was left alive. Logically speaking, the prison wasn't a place where just any trash could live. In any case, it was taxpayers' money. Some of the more vicious criminals were directly sent to Sishiya. As a grass-headed emperor, every lord had the right to change the laws in their territory. Before Luoya took action, he specifically changed the laws in this area. These evil forces would be dealt with severely. He was determined not to let them cause any more harm to the victims or retaliate against the informants. Under such a thunderous method, in just a short period of 10 days, the major gangs in Achaite City were all toppled. The loan sharks were arrested while fleeing, and the human traffickers were all caught. One after another, the hidden criminals were so scared that they lined up to surrender. They were afraid that they would be killed by Duke's troops. That's right, because Duke's troops were all youths from the military. Most of them had a strong sense of justice and a strong murderous aura. In addition to Luoya's orders, this group of source grade 5 enforcers would often be filled with righteous indignation when they saw criminals in the middle of a crime. Some of them were even killed on the spot. It had to be said that although these killing gods didn't follow the rules, the deterrence effect was too strong. Now, when the ruffians on the street saw the Achaite family's military uniform, their legs would go soft and they would tremble. Those who were timid would easily pee their pants. Chapter 126. So back to the old question, how do you gather the people's hearts? There was a saying in ancient times that whoever wins the hearts of the people wins the world. So for this difficult question, Luoya actually cheated. He had a wealth of knowledge that was different from this era. Putting aside the thousands of years of history of the Celestial Empire, Luoya, who was illuminated by the Red Star in his previous life, was very familiar with the topic of uniting the people. How to unite? To serve the people. The eyes of the people were bright. Whether a lord was good or bad, mediocre or incompetent, they could see all of these. Luoya was born a noble in this life, so it was impossible for him to walk among the people, but it was still possible for him to walk among the people. Although the special campaign against evil was a loss, and the Akhat family even paid a sum of money to compensate the victims, it was in exchange for prestige and the people's hearts, which were difficult to buy with money. On the other hand, it also united Luo Yu's team. During the campaign, the finance department, the publicity department, and the special task force worked closely together. These officials who originally served Dia were gradually familiar with Luo Yu, and they also had a preliminary sense of honor. Duke was very happy during the celebration. He was happy not only because he completed the mission, but also because he had the honor of upholding justice for the village. He gained a good reputation, and he was proud to work under Luo Yu. The same was true for the young people in the team. These people were loved by the people, and this was reflected in many aspects. Perhaps it was because they didn't need to pay for groceries, or perhaps it was because they were respected on the streets, but more than that, they were confessed to. That's right. This team quickly got rid of their single status in the process of serving the people. Some of them were even heroes saving beauties, and as their boss, Luo Yu, naturally didn't escape. He wasn't only watched by young girls, but in fact, the government building received more than 10 confession letters every day, and there were even daughters of officials who wanted to be his concubine. Of course, these requests were all rejected by Luo Yu with the reason that Dia wasn't here. Luo Yu strolled into the Akhat territory's government mansion and entered the Lord's room. Leaning on the soft leather chair, he looked out of the window and sighed in relief. The first of the three-pronged policies was undoubtedly very effective and could be considered a good start. After that, Luo Yu's second and third-pronged policies followed. The Akhat Territory Road Preparation Plan was a project that Luo Yu and the relevant staff had worked out over a period of several years. The goal was to open up the various villages and towns in Akhat territory and build a transportation network, thus laying the foundation for future development. To put it bluntly, it was infrastructure. If you want to get rich, you have to build roads first. This sentence was sufficient proof of the importance that the Celestial Empire placed on infrastructure. Luo Yu, as an upright citizen of the Celestial Empire in his previous life, could be said to have been greatly affected. How could he talk about development if he couldn't even take a proper path? One must know that whether it was military or commercial operations, a good road was the main prerequisite. The last road preparation in Akhat territory was a few decades ago when Dia just took office. Now, it had been in disrepair for a long time, and some places were impassable due to the rolling rocks. Of course, even though building roads was good, it was a huge project that required a lot of investment. Originally, Luo Yu wanted to seek financing from the Chamber of Commerce, but after looking at the pile of debt in his system, Luo Yu decided to leave a path for himself in the future. When he started, he would borrow as little as possible. In fact, even without the Chamber of Commerce, Luo Yu could do it alone because he could save a lot of money. Milton's Path of Nature, Forest Fairy Milton's research on the combination of nature and civilization. After cutting wood, it can produce wooden bricks that are as strong as rocks. When buried in the ground, they will take root and sprout. The wood elves still exist, but in a different way. Milton Sessions, Price, 30,000 points/stick, Acting Lord Memorial Event. 1,000 years of accumulation will give birth to precious wealth. 1,000 years of neglect will cause the territory to stagnate. Only wealth and prosperity can resist the butcher's knife of the enemy. 50% off. Milton's Path of Nature. Price, 10,000 points/stick. When Luo Yu saw the discounted items in the event area, it could be said that he instantly listed Milton's Path of Nature as a must-buy. All the other daily necessities paled in comparison. In ancient times, the cost of road construction was mainly concentrated in two aspects. One was manpower, which was unavoidable, and the other was the cost of the road itself. There were several types of roads. The worst wild road only needed to be compacted, but it was prone to weeds. Slightly better roads required soil frying. Better stone roads required large amounts of raw stones to be cut. On the other hand, brick roads required a higher cost because they needed to be refined and transported in a unified manner. The basic cost of refining the bricks, the fuel consumed during the firing, and the transportation after the firing. All of these added up to a huge sum of money. But with Milton's Path of Nature, all these could be saved. This item with a strange name was actually a set of tools that was enchanted with the Forest Fairy's exclusive curse. When wood was placed into the tool, it would produce wooden blocks that would increase in hardness. After being buried in the ground, it would take root like a tree. It was simply a divine tool for infrastructure in the mountainous forests. When Luoya first saw this item, he had doubts. What if it caught fire? But after testing it, Luoya realized that he was overthinking. This, Milton's path of nature, absorbed water and released water when it was on fire. It was harder to ignite than ordinary roads. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.